Thanks a lot. Really appreciate getting the time here to talk to everyone and give you a little bit of the story of how Eaton is kind of moving through this just rapidly changing environment that we have, and using elements of integrating our supply chain and also our operations, and even we're moving into how we engage all the way upstream into our engineering group too. So we'll take some time to go through this, but I thought before we got too far, I run into people, I say I work for Eaton, and they always ask, what do they do? And I kind of chuckle because it's probably, what do we not do? And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go through it. But in the core, Eaton is an intelligent power management company. And we say, as you see, there's no better time to be here, because if you look at the macro trends that are in play right now, it's amazing how much the energy transition is playing a part in almost everything that is going on today, right? We can look at different elements of the utilization of globalization, of electrification, of the stress that is on the current utility systems that we have. And quite honestly, the other area is this massive move towards digitization. In fact, I would just say the hyper growth, the hyperscalers, and the work that is going on inside of the data center has really kind of taken off to a point that if you look at where we were maybe 3 years ago versus today, it's a completely different ballgame. Everybody has in their pocket at least one computer. Some of you, and I do too, I carry 2 of them, right? And now everything being so connected, and the fact that just a few years ago, we couldn't spell chat GPT. Now you're going to it probably multiple times between chat GPT, Gemini, Copilot, Grok. It doesn't matter. I'm sure that people in this room have already accessed it multiple times today. All of that in the end is powering a significant usage of power. And we sit actually on both sides of the meter. So we're trying to figure out how to manage the electrical flow and also how to power intelligently through the systems and the data centers. So maybe to bring this a little bit closer to what we have. So Eaton's actually divided into 2 major sectors that are in there. I'll start with the electrical sector side of the business as I was touching on it, right? Utility transition, you can look at your transformers that are out there. You can see the grid. If you move on to the other side of the meter, all the switchgear and all the power that goes into a data center, Eaton is one of the primary vendors that supply that, right? We also have structural solutions and automation controls and all of those elements to it. On the other side of our business is actually probably where Eaton got its kind of footing. It has to do with the aspect of an industrial sector. So you can think of that from aerospace elements that we have to support aerospace and defense. We also have a core area of vehicle and e-mobility, valves, clutches, superchargers, and then also motors that would serve the e-mobility market. One that's not on here, and it's also another fun one, if there's any golfers in the room, we also have Golf Bride golf grips are part of our portfolio that we have. So it's a fantastic but a very, very diverse product features that we have. But I think one of the things that's kind of core to almost all of that, though, is back to intelligent power management, whether you're in an airplane, you're in a vehicle, or you're trying to run through facilities. A couple slides here to kind of make it hit home a little bit more. So this is just an overview of obviously an airline that we have. You can see just the whole elements of hoses, pumps, motors. When you get onto an airplane, you are within inches to feet of an Eaton product, because we're inside of almost everyone that's flying today. Also, in-flight air refueling systems, oxygen systems that will used by Top Gun, things of those natures. So pretty diverse in that. If you look at it from an electric vehicle market or a traditional vehicle. You can see we're in the elements of electric motors. We also do charging stations and things of that nature. And then finally, this is the one that I was referencing earlier about the growth that we're seeing in a data center, right? So all the hyperscalers, everyone who has a data center is in place. There was somebody I was talking to at dinner last night who said that across the street from them, there's a data center going on and its sole purpose is to power Call of Duty video games. And I thought, okay, data centers are going everywhere in every touch of our life. Now, one of the things about this is, I kind of mentioned the growth that's going on, right? We have facilities and factories that are seeing unprecedented growth to actually do this right now. These are switch gears, these are highly engineered, they're engineered by every hyperscaler, and what we end up doing is, because we're in such a growth area, one of the things that we recently have had to do is kind of shift our strategy to accommodate that. And when I say shift it, what we're trying to do is we're trying to move now into a fundamental growth strategy that impacts all aspects of what we're doing. We've been able to bring this forward, and we really have it on 3 primary tenets of the strategy. So there's an aspect called lead for growth, invest for growth, and execute for growth. So I just want to kind of dig in really quick on this strategy because it's going to feed into where we go next. So lead for growth actually has a couple of elements to it. So first of all, being a very customer-centric, as we heard earlier today, organization. One that really puts what are the customer needs and we work ourselves back to it. We're also looking at the way that we act differently as a culture. If you're in a global organization, you know that we have different businesses and decisions can be made in a lot of different silos, right? Decisions can be made and data can be made and sit in those silos. So we're trying to work through the element of lead for growth in the way that we actually lead as an organization to come forward with one singular approach. Invest for growth, as we talked about earlier, where are we going to make the big bets where we're going to go next? The big bets that are going to drive our growth. The big bets that will be the best move for our capital investments that we have, and also where our investors want to ensure that they're confidently putting their funding into partnering with us. But the last one there is called execute for growth, and this is probably the one that we feel quite a bit on a day-to-day basis. So executing for growth really is about transforming us from being good to what we will be best in class to drive the growth that we have. Now, this is kind of interesting because we've been around for a long time, and obviously we have our business systems, and people could rest on the laurels of, haven't we been doing this for a while? And I will even say that's part of the fact whenever you want to lead for growth is kind of taking a true view of how we're acting and how we're behaving to look at saying, are we really driving and executing our growth model the right way? So that led us to really look at what we do in a more tactical aspect, and we call it our operating for growth model. So it's an operating model where we've actually driven the customer focus is at the core of it. And you'll see we'll put the SIOP process in there because we believe very strongly that the SIOP process is the foundational approach that we have to use as we engage with the customer. Now, around that, we also have 5 pillars or tenets that we know work in engaging with everyone. So if you look at the top, our manufacturing engineering engagement. And what's interesting about that is we sometimes can fall into the trap that manufacturing is done on the shop floor and engineering is done in the design center. We don't see those as 2 separate entities anymore. They are one integrated entity, and I'm going to give an example as to why that's necessary. Obviously, production is doing what we have to do every single day, right? It's meeting your high 5 metrics, or what we call them, that everybody's used to, and doing it exceptionally well with safety, quality, delivery, cost, and inventory. Materials and logistics, once again, another key area that we're trying to really double down because of this growth that we have coming on in the demand, the procurement process, and capital and capacity management. So as we grow, We grow and we talk about investments that we're making with new facilities. We talk about investments that we're making on current facilities and upgrading your current capital. Now, on the outside of that ring, we see enabling technologies, or actually enablers of it. I shouldn't say they're just technologies. Digital enablement is down at the lower left. Functional excellence is how we organize ourselves. Talent is how we bring up our next generation. And then we're rooted in what we call the Eaton business system. I think you heard that earlier when Toyota talked about their Toyota production system, but I thought it was interesting how they felt that they were still trying to fundamentally rely on it, but also evolve it. And that's what we see also in our business system that we have going forward. So how are we making Eaton customers first? And this is actually somewhat interesting because as a company as large and as complex as Eaton, sometimes you can think that you're just in the switchgear business or you're in the hydraulic pump business. We're actually in elements of, and what we mentioned is providing intelligent power. And so we have to move ourselves closer to what the customer's needs are. And this is a transition that we're actually moving through. But one of the things that we wanted to kind of, and maybe this is what we've learned as we've went through the process of going through these stages of growth, is how do we create a resilient supply chain? So we see resiliency as being kind of two stages here, right? How are we going to detect and how are we going to mitigate these two, right? So systems and tools, and we actually measure, we have metrics around what level of resiliency we have with our suppliers and in our supply chain. What can we do on detection levels of the supply chain mapping, the risk nodes that we have in place? What are we doing to sense and monitor, stay in front of it? Scenario analysis. I heard someone today mention plan A, B, C, D, and how many times they've had to execute D because A, B, and C moved on them so quickly. Those are the elements that you have to go through. How are those scenarios being played out? What can we do with the resiliency that you have? On the mitigation side, the supply chain network design, incredibly complex, but also a very important aspect of what we're doing. Our category strategies, and then also moving into our new product introductions, building them with resiliency. Not something that is natural for people to do. Sometimes we have a tendency to go fast, short timeline. We need to go live by a certain date. We've done that before in this part of the world. Let's pick up, move over here, and do it again in another part of the world. Integrating that into your new product introductions in a proper way, that you actually change the way that you've done in the past so that you can do resiliency up front. A key part of what we're trying to integrate into the way we change our processes. Now, part of that is kind of leading now into what we want to talk about with AI. So I think that this is kind of an interesting play, and you can see we have this investment projected to reach $600 billion this year. That number may be low based off what you're hearing also, right? But this is an unprecedented level of investments that are being made just in AI. In fact, I think that, I heard an economist speak not too long ago. If you stripped back the data center investments out of the GDP for the US, you would at best be flat this year. That's how much the data center investments have grown to be impacting the overall GDP. But we talk about here about moving beyond AI literacy into AI leadership. Now that's actually a really important state, because I think if you were to reverse our clock back 12 months ago, definitely 18 months ago, it was all about, are we training? Are we understanding AI? Are we able to get people used to Copilot? Things of that nature. What could it be? Can a training class check the box for us? We're shifting into the fact that it's not about just knowing it. Now it's going to be about implementing it, integrating it, and leading with AI. Because our customers are driving that same level of understanding. So one of the things that we also do, and I like this slide a lot, And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, but digital data connects us all. So if you were to look at this inside of Eaton and you start on the customer side, we have about 7.7 million SKUs. That's driven into our design center to have to handle about 32 million part numbers. It's driven into our supply base that we handle about 30,000 suppliers. Doing that and building those products in about 200 plants with about another 35 warehouses and distribution centers, all to feed the elements of getting it to our customers. So that alone sounds like a complex organization in itself whenever you start to layer that on top of each other. Let me add on top of it the complexity of systems, right? We've grown through acquisitions. So it's great that we get to grow through acquisitions. It's great that you get the product, you integrate the culture. Unfortunately, you get to buy in the systems that they have. Any type of ERP system, we've got it. Any type of MES system, we've probably touched it. Especially the most famous MES that we have, which is Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. That's on every single plant floor. Design centers, warehousing systems, you name it, we have it. It's a very complex thread of data that's moving through us. So on one hand, when we talk about it, you can go from one end where we have operations that truly data is very isolated. It sits in databases, and we're not leveraging it very well at all. We'll go to other ones, and we're going to talk about the fact that we've driven through lighthouse programs that are actually hyper-connected. Now I've almost over-indexed that instead of data and information, I have actually data noise sitting on top of us. And that's another dangerous spot that we found ourselves walk right into very quickly. So if you take a snapshot in time right now inside of Eaton, to make this happen inside of Eaton right now in the last hour that we've been here, there's probably somewhere in a certain operation, I would say that we're in nearly 100 decision points that are getting made on one single operation a day in an hour time frame, right? Let's extend that through the 200 to the 30,000. We're talking not hundreds of decisions and not thousands of decisions. We're probably into millions of decisions that are happening every single hour of the day at this level that we're working at. So you can tell that at the rate and the speed that we would be going at, that being able to use this through a bunch of macros anymore, or export files that move, it's not going to do it. There's just too many decisions. I have operations that are sitting here, operations, suppliers, designs, that if you move yourself back less than 3 years ago, they were designed to run at something around a 3 to 5% growth trajectory. That's just what they did. That's how we operated. We were satisfied with that. The data center, the aero, and the vehicle space, we now have plants and operations that are sitting on a 15 to 20% growth. Right on top of them, it's been sitting on them for 12 months. There's no end in sight. What we are not going to do is we are not going to engage and have to put 20% more capital into it. We're not going to put 20% more workers into it. We're not going to allow ourselves to miss on-time deliveries, and we're not going to let our inventories balloon. That's not acceptable. That's not how growth will work for us. So we're looking at this whole aspect of a hyper-growth organization that's moving through these challenges as to how are we going to get ourselves kind of put through this. And quite honestly, the only way that we see it is to be highly intelligent in your data. Now, one other point I want to make, and this is where we as Eaton have done this, and we've actually been able to stub our toe on this and reset. We can go into every one of these little boxes and isolate ourselves and try and do the best that we can in every one of those boxes, where we can walk into a design team and they will do all that they can to generate the greatest design, and then allow that to go over into the supply chain, who then has to go through and work diligently about sourcing all those parts, not looking at complexity reduction, Doesn't matter. We're going to do it inside a supply chain. And then you go into operations where we can be working every single day trying to meet our throughput, not realizing that we have bottlenecks in our throughput that actually now impacts our supply chain, which then impacts the fact that we need to come through with a secondary resilient supply chain, right? And so these are the elements that we can see ourselves walk into when you look at this and you take on these daunting tasks of moving this through a very complex hyper-growth situation. So one of the things that we didn't want to do is try and tackle this one and say, we've got it, coach. We can do it on our own. So becoming an AI leader means you leverage the ecosystem that is out there. Now, this is just an example of about 4 key partners that we have collaborated with very closely. In fact, absolutely critical to executing what we have to do. And I think if you look back on that prior slide where we had these elements to it and all these key tenets, these 4 vendors that we work with, they actually look at how we interact with all of those. So they're not trying to isolate themselves in just a single operational tenet that we have. So I think many of you probably know, and I know that Kinaxis is sitting here, but that's been a implementation journey that we've been on and we continue to be on to help us through our different ERP integrations and our demand planning that we have. Microsoft has been a fantastic partner, whether it was in the Azure side of it, the IoT systems to it, but now really helping us drive through the elements of AI agents to help streamline us. ServiceNow integrated into the workflow that we do, fantastic in trying to detect work that we have. And then Palantir, if you are familiar with them, they've been a fantastic partner to come up with where they look at a massive amount of data that we have. Just a couple of examples where they've been able to do an automated spec reader on a design, read the specs, look at the models, look at the drawings that we have, and something that would have traditionally been a human process to go through and do that. Also, they went through, and I talked about the data noise side of it. They were able to move through and integrate into an operation, look at our OEE data, find the bottlenecks, find the reasons for down codes or downtime reasons that we have, and isolate it very quickly so that we could put mitigation plans in place and not wait for the chaos, we'll just say, of the daily operations that are working. And they've also got another tool that we've been able to co-develop with them on a clear to build. Just being able to work through, are we ready to build? Will we be ready? Do we have the parts in line? Whenever you're looking at, switch gears that has, several thousand part numbers in it that need to be built in a day. So finding these collaborative efforts have been a fantastic step for us. I wanted to kind of spend a little bit on what this cycle of resiliency through AI looks like. Obviously, if you look through this, and you can kind of start in the upper right, where we go through and we, do an identify risk. We run through an analysis. We predict the outcome, and then we have the learned outcomes. And I think we've heard this several times in the last day, and I just think that this kind of reinforces it. This isn't a one-time move through. When I look at this and kind of going back to your old lean days, right, this feels like plan, do, check, act. But the difference on plan, do, check, act is it's a relatively methodical, and I would say in today's terms, a relatively slow-moving process. Whereas now as we come through this process, this is like a supercharged flywheel now working. You can move through that cycle of identifying the risk, doing the analysis, moving through the outcomes, learn it, move it again, move it again, move it again, right? So we heard that in the fact that it will go through a learning process. Have the patience to go through the learning process, but once you get through it, it's a very highly fast-moving process that we move through. So it's been a fantastic model that we're working through, and I think that we truly at Eaton are trying to learn how this would work also, especially as we move it up into our supply chains or we move it into our operations that we have there. I wanted to kind of talk, because I've talked about a few things about what we're doing, I wanted to bring this one maybe a little bit closer to home. We have an operation. It's in Cleveland, Tennessee, not Cleveland, Ohio, where I actually live, but it's in Cleveland, Tennessee. Cleveland, Tennessee is about 30 minutes outside of Chattanooga. It's a beautiful place. But the realities of that area is labor's scarce. There's a Volkswagen plant just down the road. There's some other processing plants in the area. So they know that they have a fundamental challenge in labor, and that's okay for them. They can go through and they feel like they have ways to drive that ability to retain. But what we did inside of Eaton is we looked and said, we want to kind of set up the foundation of what's called a lighthouse. If you followed the World Economic Forum, they talk about those. Our own CEO wanted to challenge ourselves. This is a legacy plant. It wasn't a greenfield site, but it's a plant that we wanted to move into because they actually had a lot of positive growth that was naturally occurring in their product. Now, in all fairness, we actually picked 5 lighthouse locations throughout the world to do this. We mixed it with greenfields, brownfields, or extensions of brownfields, and then also what we called our legacy plants. So we picked a US and Mexico, one in Europe, one in China, and we kind of went through, and Brazil. So we went through these aspects of really just trying to dig in, working through a cultural change in an operation. Now, when I say there's a cultural change in the operation, we didn't go in, we found the technophile guy in the plant. We actually went to the plant management team. We had him, we had the controller, we had the supply chain, the HR, the operations, the quality manager, and we all went through and we worked with them about how would you use digital data? What's your digital mindset? They wanted to first start with how do we change our culture? How do we ask questions about this? They went through and they looked at the technology infrastructure they had. They looked at the way that they use data out of their ERP system and up front in their demand planning. They looked at how they ran the shop floor. All of that was a process that they went through. This was not a 1-month process. Literally, we went through, and I think that we kind of dealt with, we worked with Cleveland probably somewhere between, it was close to 18 months. We had starts, we had pullbacks, they had challenges. We're on the other side of it. You can see that as we've went through this, these are documented elements that the revenue has increased. Some of us would come back and say, well, the revenue may have been driven by a demand that was out there. It's okay. They had to find a way to accommodate that increase in the revenue that was coming. They found a way to improve their productivity. They reduced their backlog, and they improved their capacity, all in documented formats. The other thing that they did is they signed up for the ability to teach others how they did it. They would talk about the fact that they changed their culture, they changed their systems, they changed the way that they looked at data. In fact, the plant manager there, his name's Karthik. I went to Karthik, I said, hey Karthik, I know that this has been an element of, a challenge that you've taken on and all that, but what if we pulled it back? What if we really said, thanks for trying, we had to go back? He said, absolutely not. We will never be able to go back. We would die very quickly. This plant would not exist. It would be lifted out of here and it would be moved somewhere else. He knew that for a fact. It was the only way that survival and excellence was going to work, was the ability to grab and lean into using digital data through all aspects of that chart that we showed before. So this will be the last slide. I talked about early on how it was all about lead, invest, and execute for growth, and that's what we have. And then on the right side is kind of where we want to essentially move ourselves through, which is the customer and supplier satisfaction. So you start at the aspect of being customer first, knowing that it's going to drive your growth. But you can see that we have integrated elements that play a role. So we had to have an integrated supply chain and operations team that we've talked about has now been formed. So we don't just talk about supply chain, right? We don't just talk about operations. You ever been in a room when operations says, I'm out of parts? Supply chain says, we built the parts based off the bill of material you gave me. Engineering says, well, the bill of material changed. Well, that's because the customer changed it. We can't do that. We have to be integrated in it. We're going to invest in the technology, AI as not just a literacy, but a leadership mode, and then looking at how we integrate our resiliency into everything that we're doing, working through our plans that we have, the scenario planning going forward, and then driving into the real actions. And we're pretty proud of the fact that we've been able to stand up these integrated supply chains. We have a lot more work to do. We have a lot more investment that we're going to continue to do on our data integration side, a lot more investment that we'll do in automation and data on our shop floor, and a lot of work to be done, still continuing to work with integrating our design teams, our supply teams, and our operations teams. So with that, we've got just a couple minutes for questions, so I'd be happy to take any if there were.
Any questions? They may know that lunch is next, Craig, and so they're putting off asking the questions right here up front.
Very interesting presentation. When you talk about AI literacy to AI leadership, how does that translate to rank and file employees?
Yeah, so interesting how that, once again, I'm just gonna go back to say, the way that we ran that in the past, like I said, we'd said, take your training, get the certificate. You know what happens after that? We moved into an aspect of, I have a project idea. So we created innovation, like an AI funnel where ideas were being able to be brought in. We were able to, we've actually set up a small little AI development team that will look at these ideas, look at these projects that are being discussed, and say, can we rapidly look at how we could integrate and develop a solution? We've also looked at the fact that, even you get a lot of ideas, but then we're looking at which one of these would really scale out. So that's a great idea. If I can solve that for your CNC machine, how many other CNC machines could that do? If I could look at it for how it could integrate and optimize, our material usage in a stamping operation that happened in one plant, what would be that impact that we could have if we could scale it out? So we look at that and we moved it into literacy into leadership where we wanted to train people, but we wanted their ideas as they went through it, and then we set up a structure in the background that we could facilitate that.